Welcome to Cosentino City, Singapore. Today we are hosting session number 10 of our talk, Architecture and Beyond, titled The End is Not the End. We are excited tonight to partner with SIA and Archifest for a wonderful night. So this year, the theme for Archifest Interim, the Acts of Adaptation, invite us to rethink about the environment, the technology, and the culture that can impact architecture design. So today with us, we have Iskandar from Super Assembly to share with us his special quest on his journey on the projects, as well as the processes of how Super Assembly go through a creative work, and then as an architect, how he exploit his design or actually ventures into the different creative works. So without further ado, I will pass it to Yann from Vito Group to bring us through the event this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Celine. Welcome everyone. So it's a pleasure to be here for the 10th session, as mentioned just now. It's a very particular session today because it is with Archifest and also with BOS, so thanks for the CPD point by the Board of Architects. And just for the people who don't know yet about the TAP Series 3, so it is the third edition of the Talks on Architecture and Beyond with Cosentino. And this year we are looking into the commitment of architect towards the planet, towards the people, towards the future, and how do they practice in their daily life their passion. This year it's a very special year as well. We had fantastic speakers until today, and I'm sure that Iskandar will be another fantastic speaker that are really sharing some personal moments in their journey through architecture and for the built environment. So today I will just read a little bit about Iskandar. I've been knowing Iskandar for a few years, and I've been following his stellar career, being very impressed with all of his creation that we're about to see today. So Iskandar is a registered architect in Singapore, and he believed that design and architecture has a deep culture of synthesis informed by values and sense of responsibility to culture, society, and ecology, which correspond perfectly to the theme of the TAP series this year. So the title of his talk, "The End is Not the End." So the nature of the creative process and the making of architecture is such that you may never feel like you are finished with the perfect design. But as soon as times run out, then you are. So Iskandar will explore the paradoxical aspect of architectural creation, where the quest for perfect design can feel never ending, yet time constraint invariably bring each project to a close. So I'm very, very excited to see what Iskandar is bringing to us today. So welcome to the stage, Iskandar.
Right. Thank you, Cosentino Asia and Vito for organizing this TAP series. Definitely an honor and a privilege to be invited here today to give a talk. So I'm Iskandar from Super Assembly. So today I'll be pretty much sharing a very personal journey in practice. So as Yann probably mentioned just now, so about the title of the talk. So about this idea of architectural creation is this dynamic process that kind of like embraces both divergence and convergence. In other words, like, a journey of exploration and then focus at the same time. So divergence in the initial phase where, you kind of explore possibilities and space, where creative mind explore infinite potentials. And then the convergence, on the other hand, comes in the sense of a direction or focus, where you try to kind of combine disparate ideas coming together to form a kind of a solution. So the first part of my presentation, I'll be sharing a bit about my personal journey on how I got here. So it all started out in a Mongolian girl, so nestled in a remote countryside, don't know where exactly. So I was like accompanied by a group of friends, fresh out of the graduation ceremony. And so in that Mongolian girl, we had this conversation about what next. And then I realized at that point that every one of my friends sitting there, that girl, already had a job. So they was waiting for them back in Singapore. So except for me, so like I had no idea. So I hadn't been very diligent, hadn't done my research. So I hadn't really worked as an intern during university. So I had no idea. I had no clue about what working as an architect entails. And all my knowledge about being an architect was basically from the textbook. Right, so the scenery for Mongolia set an ideal backdrop for a moment of reflection. No, but actually no, it's more like panic lah. So I needed a job. So one of my friend, I mean, the girl said, "Oh, why don't you apply for a job where she got a position in?" So and then okay, and then she'll drop a text, and then I'll go for the interview, and then okay, then that's it. So. And this is the Mongolian kata, traditional ceremonial scarf, right? So it is worn or presented alongside incense in ceremonial events that such as like, weddings, graduations, and it is typically blue to symbolize the blue sky. So leaving behind Mongolia then, so I returned to Singapore and attended that interview where my friend, got a job at. So I was offered a position soon after the interview. So that basically marked the beginning of my journey in architectural practice. So the landscape at my first job was paradoxically a little like the Mongolian grassland, but perhaps a little bit sinister looking lah. I mean, it's a construction site, and there was in a container office. So my first chapter of practice kind of exposed me to an aspect of architecture making that was very technical, very big in scale, but very necessary, and which involved in, I mean, I just, if you're architecture, I mean, the technical aspect and the ugly side of architecture making and construction. And as a new graduate, I found myself grappling with a bit of confusion because, I mean, I was expected to attend like this technical coordination meeting with the M&E engineer and the construction engineer, I mean, with the structural engineer. And then I was like, I was like completely lost. So I in my kind of naivety, after graduating, thinking that architecture practice was this inspiring place where everybody was still talking about design, and then but it was not quite the reality that I faced. So I lasted 6 months, and then I decided to resign, and then I decided to take a break and travel to Sri Lanka. So I was almost that close to becoming the 93% statistic very early on. So Jeffrey Bauer's journey began when he actually acquired this neglected rubber estate, near a lake. And at that time, he was a lawyer. He grew disenchanted with his profession. So his initial vision for the land was to actually transform it into an Italian-style garden because he just came back traveling in Italy. So, but then he realized that he lacked the necessary technical expertise to embark on this project of his. So then he took internship and then subsequently got himself into AA, and then he graduated and then finally became quite a remarkable Sri Lankan architect, I'm sure you guys know. And it was only until at the age of 38. So he became one of Asia's most prolific architects. And the garden at Lunuganga especially remained his kind of first muse and continual experiment throughout his journey as an architect. So basically, he changed and experimented ideas and spaces throughout his life and used this as a site of kind of test bed. So at 28, I found myself in this garden, and if it was any consolation, I was younger than Bauer when he finished architecture school. So the first trip to Sri Lanka and experiencing sort of like Lunuganga and Bauer's other work was actually a much needed crossroad. I mean, it was much needed thing that I needed at the crossroad of my life. And kind of in retrospect, I think the works of Bauer left an impression. I think because they evoke these pleasures of the senses that go hand in hand with the climate, landscape, and the culture of ancient Sri Lanka. And Bauer, I found, was able to kind of bring together this appreciation for Western humanist tradition in architecture with the needs and lifestyle of his own country, which is Sri Lanka. So looking back on that trip, I think my main takeaway was that contemporary architecture sometimes is frequently linked to an emotional coldness, like an exclusive, restrictive aesthetics, as a sense of detachment from life generally. I think, instead of aligning our buildings with realities of life and human life experiences, we as architects often adopt formalistic approach rather than envisioning the kind of the structures that we build as a kind of resonant settings and backgrounds for lived life experiences of people. We tend to kind of prioritize, the functional, the technical, the aesthetic considerations in our design process. So I think in my takeaway was that I think instead of tuning our buildings with realities of life, we sometimes adopt this formalistic attitude because it is much easier to kind of solve geometrical problems rather than life problems. So, but yet architecture is pretty much a kind of choreography of life. And in the words of kind of like Yohani Palasma, weakness in the sense of life in our buildings may not result from a deliberate emotive distance or formalistic rejection of life's complexities, but simply because, like I mentioned, geometric configurations are easier to imagine than the shapelessness and dynamic acts of life taking place in these spaces that we build. So, but then again, architectural forms are humanly only meaningful when they are experienced in interaction and resonance with lives. So there's this quote from this Romanian sculptor, Constantin Boncuș, on his thoughts about art. And he said, the work must give immediately all at once the shock of life, a sensation of breathing. So I kind of hold the perspective that architectural thinking perhaps should broaden its horizon to encompass the entirety of life and embracing its practical and psychological aspect. But of course, easier said than done. In the capitalist age, we often fall victim to economic structures, that govern our life. There are things that we need to kind of address. But I guess it's as kind of running super assembly is kind of important. I think for us to always, I have to sometimes remind myself that the practice of architecture really lies on the foundation of humanistic cause. So fast forward after the trip, I joined a small practice after that. So as mentioned, Formworks Architects. So, and it was kind of only after I joined the firm that I realized that the founders of the firm similarly had made that same trip to Sri Lanka and was similarly inspired by their early formative years. So it's really a kind of a strange coincidence. So I worked there for 7 years. So it was tremendously enriching, I must say. Met wonderful people during that time and whom we continue to stay in touch. And then Alan Tay is also here, surprisingly. I wasn't expecting. Yeah. So after leaving Formworks, I started Super Assembly and basically here we are today. So these are my colleagues. They are all like sitting at the back over there. Yeah. So as a group of kind of individuals who share a common mindset, and our team always tries to kind of stay away from, I would try to kind of stay away from rigid stylistic formulas to solve our problems. We approach each project kind of with an open-mindedness, always inquisitive, and we see the importance of actually fostering dialogue with our clients, because I think based on my experience, is that if you kind of include clients as partners in the co-creation process, it's a kind of pivotal factor in kind of, first of all, I mean, you achieve works that genuinely reflect the values. But secondly, when issues do crop up along the way, if the clients buy into the principal vision, because they are also part of the, part of this collaborative process, it makes kind of problem solving a lot smoother. So right after this, I kind of run through some of the projects that we have worked on hence far, and I'll start off with this project. It was actually one of the first projects that we worked on after setting up Super Assembly, and this is also in collaboration with Formworks. Yeah. So this is kind of this window house. So it's basically designed to meet a young family of 3. So the client wanted this house capable of accommodating multiple gatherings engaged in diverse activities. So in this concept, what we did was we weaved a sequence of communal spaces and circulation routes around a central landscape courtyard. So, and what is notably around these communal spaces, they have distinct variations in terms of height, size, spatial quality, so creating these interesting experiences of space around the courtyard. So this is the courtyard I mentioned, so which is actually at the heart of the house. It's basically an open courtyard with a spiral staircase from the basement. So the circulation routes kind of revolve around this central courtyard from the basement, which is a drive-in basement. And this diagram basically shows all the communal spaces that are kind of shaped in different volumes but a kind of string around the courtyards. So, and the volumetric quality of each communal space is varied, I think, in terms of like, ceiling height, spaces, and things like that. But more importantly is that on top of that, the size and position of the apertures or openings that one's view from the different spaces around allows for a moment where gaze can kind of penetrate through several layers of space. And, so like, this is a section of the house, and this is the courtyard. So the idea with this is that when you are in the spaces, the idea was that the apertures were kind of designed such that it allows at moments as you kind of like experiencing the space, that you get moments where your sight line kind of is able to kind of go through a series of apertures to apertures, and then you look through somebody is like sitting in another space. So the idea was that, you have this dynamic kind of experience walking and exploring the house. Yeah. This is the view of the courtyard with kind of overlapping. So at some point, if you're looking, I'm standing here, I'm looking through that, through the courtyard, and then, there's this opening here that kind of gives a peek into the living area. Well, if I look up here, there's something else that's happening, there's something happening. So that was kind of the idea for this house. So we wanted to kind of create this kind of rich spatial experience. So the house is like, sometimes you go into a house where you can't really tell what's happening. Like sometimes you go into a house, you can see, everything, you can read the space. But this house is a bit like a maze. So the idea was intentionally like that. And so this is a playground, which is actually a kind of like a miniature kind of version of that house. And so because we kind of like have these spaces and with openings, it could actually, like I said, can be quite confusing. So what we did was that we also introduced very bright colors intentionally, so that it kind of draws your sightline. When you passing by a space, you see a kind of glimpse of this red thing, and then to kind of draw your eyes to go through the different apertures and layers of things. So even in the bathroom, we kind of carried through that concept of apertures and openings, and then the use of a singular color to kind of it's like even in the design of this powder room, we kind of like it's a very strange, like almost like a corridor, like kind of like a powder room, but we segregated intentionally to kind of show these layerings of different space. So makes the kind of experience a bit richer. So during our post-completion visit to the client, and we kind of asked them about their experience living in the newly finished house, I think the response was something which I wasn't expecting. So it was quite intriguing. They kind of say that they started to notice like various birds, visitors coming, and then captivating landscape by the windows. So because actually, if you look at it, I mean, the amount of landscape for this house is basically located at the central courtyard, and some of the landscaping that because after building up the whole site, we are only left with like 2 meters of planting. So the garden isn't particularly huge, but the fact that the way that we carefully created the views through the windows kind of made them kind of aware to pay greater attention to the garden outside. Yeah. Okay, this one is another house currently under construction, and for this project, we kind of adopted a different approach to integrate green elements into so in contrast to the previous courtyard typology. So this house instead, we kind of featured a segmented massing. So this client is kind of interesting. So he loves plants, so he wants to kind of really incorporate garden into his space. So what we did was, taking the massing, and then we kind of make crevices like this, and then to allow for kind of the green to kind of creep into the house and be seamlessly incorporated. So the idea for this was that we wanted to kind of create different experiences of green, like, when you first enter, you kind of get these trees puncturing through the carporch roof. which also kind of continues a bit into the foyer space. And then you kind of have also a internal garden, a courtyard, or a kind of atrium space internalized with a kind of skylight. So for this particular house is that we wanted to incorporate that, and also because if you notice, we kind of just made that decision because it's 2-story landed house, so we made a deliberate attempt to lower the first story at the rear, so allowing us to kind of do a basement floor. So basically, this decision kind of allow us to kind of fulfill the client's programmatic needs for the specific number of rooms, while at the same time allow us a bit of flexibility to create void spaces, high volume spaces, while still kind of meeting the client's needs. So the area at the back here is kind of recessed so that we can slot in another mezzanine floor that allows us to therefore cut void spaces to allow for the kind of like this kind of interesting vistas and kind of views. Okay, then this is a next project, and in many instances we encounter situations where the design process necessitates changes, modifications, and alterations. So it's a new build. So what you're seeing here right now are like from a few rounds. I think there was like 10 over iteration, but I just kind of put 4 here. So whether it's due to constraints or evolving circumstances, the final design is often not the same as the initial concept. And this alteration sometimes is driven by clients' evolving needs or requirements, or they may be kind of influenced by regulatory authorities. So, but what we consider crucial in these situations is always to maintain a clear understanding of the original design intent or the seed of the idea, so that whenever changes are required, the fundamental essence of the project is hopefully preserved. So for this project, it was quite interesting. The client's brief, this client has some intriguing requests. It ranges from wanting an entrance to kind of, he doesn't want a living room, but rather he wants to enter into a cafe, and then rather than a conventional living room. And he wanted a double-story walk-in wardrobe and even like a dome pavilion for a reading nook. So in response to this kind of unique need, so our design for this particular house was that we kind of create a terracing section of all the communal space. So like when you enter, the entrance is actually from here. You enter into kind of like this cafe, kitchen, dry kitchen, cafe setting, and the living room is actually at the lower first story. So, but the idea was that wherever you are in all the communal spaces, you kind of are able to kind of have a visual kind of connections to everyone in the family. So that was something that we wanted to keep. And then we thought that was the end. We submitted and then started construction. And then I realized that we had an issue. So because we kind of wanted this, initially the initial design was something like that. It has a big opening, and then with a glass through, and then I realized that such a big opening doesn't comply to FSSD unprotected opening. So and so we had an issue here. So and then so after we tried to submit a waiver and kind of argue for it, and then saying that actually the boundary wall covers half of it, so technically the amount of area is not that big because covered by the boundary wall. As architects we try all kind of ways to kind of try to convince authorities, but in the end, I mean, we still had to kind of set back. So in the end, the result was that we had to kind of set back this window, and we had and at the same time, it's kind of interesting in that it actually, I felt, made the design a bit better because, imagine, because the view behind this was actually not really a view because you had a view of kind of HDB blocks. And so having this setback and a planter, it allows us to kind of plant this area and create that scene. So this is actually the house under construction. So if standing at where the entrance is, this is where the landscape will be. So imagine if this space wasn't a landscape, and you end up having a big window this big, and then you be staring at your neighbor, and then the HDB at the back. So in some sense, it's sometimes we should embrace changes. an authority's requirement. So this is another view looking up towards that landscape, that planter that later on will be planted, and then this double volume space that kind of looks up. And then this is another project that recently got completed. So responding to a kind of triangular site bounded by two roads. So we needed to kind of address the privacy concerns by nearby industrial buildings. So this house called the Shell House was basically designed for a small family. So I think it's for 3 people. So, this is very small private people that want a very kind of cozy house. So the concept kind of materializes as a series of terracing shell within the house that kind of mimics the protective layer of a seashell. So with this, and in between the shells, we kind of introduce kind of skylights, because we kind of want to kind of have little windows here because of the oversight, of the privacy issue, and by having this skylight, we ensure there's privacy for the occupant, yet at the same time kind of light up the space and give a sense of seclusion and security. This is the view of the inside looking up. So one of the primary challenges that we encountered is aligning the site's triangular constraints, and the peculiar site necessitates some kind of configuration to make the space a bit more optimum. And another hurdle was the harsh morning sun that was from the southeast. So what we did was we introduced a double facade system, Decton. Not advertising here, but really we use Decton by Cosentino for this project. So it kind of helped very much in kind of addressing the issue. So this was actually some of the video on site actually installing the facade system. This was, I just included this because this was such a beautiful sketch, and this unfortunately wasn't drawn by me. My sketch isn't that neat, but it's actually by the contractor. We were trying to kind of resolve the skylight that was that we had to kind of customize because the system didn't quite have a solution for this. So this was just something that I wanted to add. So this is a photograph showing the heart of the house where the dining room is. So it's a key space for the family to host the family and when extended family and friends. And then the idea of visual connection to the different spaces is the upper floor to kind of create this sense of being together. And we do a lot of houses, and in the design of our houses, we usually try to kind of create interesting common spaces that kind of promotes family interactions. Because at the end of the day, like sometimes clients come to you and say, hey, I want a maximum number of rooms. I want to have the big room as much as possible. But but the problem is sometimes rooms are very insular things, and then and at the expense of the nice, delightful spaces that we kind of try to kind of incorporate in our houses. So in contrast, this is a photo of the skylight also at the bathroom. So the skylight also kind of is used to lit up this space, the private spaces, and at the same time give the privacy of this. And this is a section kind of looking through the dining space and with the facade. So we also do a bit of interior jobs. So when the owner for this particular project kind of come to us, she mentioned that the reason she bought this unit was actually for the sea view. It was a 3-bedroom unit overlooking the southern coast. So, and she actually rarely used the 3 rooms. So what we did was we kind of proposed the bedroom adjacent to the living room to be kind of demolished to allow for a panoramic view of the sea to be extended. So, and because given the client's strong preference for this Japanese aesthetic, because she told us that she wanted this Japanese aesthetic into the house, so we in this particular project we kind of explored this idea of repetition, rhythm, and variation as a kind of recurring element to kind of promote a sense of calmness. So as a result of this, we kind of varied the trellises that, the trellises that you kind of associate with Japanese aesthetic. So we kind of vary the density, the rhythm, and the scale of these trellises, and also at the same time to kind of align them with the rhythmic patterns of sea wave that kind of was inspiring this whole project. So this was the original layout of the house, and this was the kind of the room that was demolished, and then we kind of made into a we can open up this thing and then it can be returned back into a room lah. So that was the idea. So there's the finished product. So that with this room demolished, the panorama of the sea kind of get extended out, but you can also at the same time kind of claim back that space for a bedroom. Aside from houses, I mean, we kind of got an opportunity to kind of do a larger scale public project, which was kind of interesting, kind of rejuvenating also, because, it's kind of interesting for us because instead of always engaging with a single owner, for this particular project, we kind of involved several stakeholders. This was for a neighborhood renewal program at Woodlands under Sembawang Town Council. So for this particular case, the site is in very close proximity to the Woodlands waterfront and Admiralty Park. So what we kind of attempted to do was to kind of establish a green belt that connects. So this is the site. And so we wanted to kind of string a green belt throughout the site and at the same time kind of expanding and supplementing the existing park connector. This is the site. So we identified kind of 3 open spaces for us to kind of intervene. So as part of the design strategy, we kind of deliberately chose to kind of integrate play, fitness, and sports facilities within the green belt rather than having them segregated, rather than having a space for playground and a space for sports. So we kind of break them up into smaller bits and kind of combine them. And in our initial, in our proposal, we wanted to kind of also adopt the traditional practice of planting of the same species of trees over extensive areas, but rather than we recommended a diverse array of native trees and shrubs to introduce kind of a richer and more balanced kind of landscape. And also rather than isolating community gardens from the landscape, we kind of choose to integrate them seamlessly into the surroundings. So this was kind of a drawing of that proposal. So this was one of the first note, and then like the second note where we kind of try to incorporate community garden with the community garden and also a landscape area at the same time. So what is interesting about this project is that we also introduced this design element that, if you notice, in all 3 notes, you had these kind of round things. So this was meant to be kind of earth mounts. So we basically, despite navigating through multiple rounds of approvals and public consultation, I think there must have been like 5 rounds. And we got through all of this, and then this was approved, this earth mounting. The whole idea was that we kind of wanted to create because it was generally a flat ground, and we wanted to kind of create differences in to create interesting topography in the landscape. So, but it's construction started, and then they basically, this was a kind of mock-up, not really mock-up, they did so many already. So, and then one of the resident, or just one resident to complain, and it's because it looks like a grave. So it looks like a grave. So, and then he was very angry, because it's an unauspicious thing to be seeing outside his house, and then we had so many of them throughout the estate, and then it literally looked, to his opinion, in his whole point of view, it really looked like a massive graveyard. So then we had to kind of go back and address this. So, and we tried to kind of morph because cost was a thing. So we had this made in like soil, right? So I mean, so how do you make an earth mound look less like a graveyard? So I tried something like, I mean, it didn't really look this ugly in my initial sketch really, but the contractor blamed the contractor, right, for like not delivering. But so in an attempt to address all this, there were a few rounds of modifying the shape lah. But however, I think it comes to mind, and then also we realized that working with soil, and then it was the first time I was proposing this, and then we realized that it was actually a lot more difficult to work with soil and creating an earth mound in reality than on SketchUp, you know. Then so and then at the same time that, you know, after a few weeks, if you don't maintain it, you know, you get weeds and then the grass overgrown. So yeah, so we kind of decided to kind of, this not working, man, it's not working. But we were like, we had so many of these, so what should we replace it with, right? So we kind of try like you know, exploring different forms. So in the end, we kind of settled on choosing to work with GFRC, and then we were going to finish it with EPDM instead of like soil and grass. So, and it kind of actually was a better solution actually, because when we first initially proposed this, we imagined naively thinking that kids will go and sit on this earth mound and then, you know, have a picnic, wishful thinking lah. So actually, you know, in the end, by in the end choosing GFRC and then EPDM, it was actually a much better decision lah. So we had like, so in the process of doing so, one module was consisting of 4 parts, a quadrant, and then so this is what you're looking at is actually the mold, and then they are taking out one of the module out of that mold. Yeah, and then on site, this is without the EPDM finish. So yeah. And then over the weekend, because I was preparing these slides, right, I need to show, I brought my son and my nephew over to the thing, and then it was like kind of taking a video of how they kind of interacted with this thing. Yeah. So I think overall, I think it was, our first reaction as designers sometimes is to, like, you know, resist change, resist having to kind of go back to the drawing board. But, you know, sometimes, you know, if you think again, that whole process of design, sometimes, you know, you yourself sometimes don't know when to stop designing, and then until the deadline kind of strike. So, but sometimes it's not something that you want to change, but sometimes you're forced to change. But sometimes the change is for the better also lah. Yeah. So these are some of the photos of the plants just came in, so it looked a bit messy, but that was the idea of it. Okay, last project already. So the final project I will discuss today is a house that is kind of situated at the outskirts of a neighborhood estate. So what is interesting about the site is that this is the location of the house. So just adjacent, it is the fringe of it, and adjacent to it is actually a military training ground. So and the house is kind of designed to accommodate a multi-generation family of 4 generations, mind you. So there's like, I think 12 people living in that house. So the idea behind this house was that, you know, in a very crowded landed estate, I mean, in Singapore, where land is kind of very precious, you know, it's very, not very often that we unless you stay in GCP, even nowadays GCP also, like, the view may not be so good. So, you know, this whole idea of having an unobstructed natural vista is kind of a rarity. So when we saw that the site was kind of located at the fringe, where, you know, at the back, at the rear, where you have this kind of forested area, and because it's a military area, so most likely, you know, it's going to be a forested area for quite some time. So we took this as an opportunity. So we kind of designed this house, like, you know, with a shell as a to kind of approach this idea of this concept of isolation. Like, how do you kind of come up with a solution that basically shield the sidelines of your neighboring properties while embracing the limited glimpse of the natural view at the back. So it was kind of okay, this is the floor plan. So it was designed with 3 stories. So the first volume basically the first story. This is where you enter from a car garage. So okay, the name that we kind of gave this house was the blinker house. So the idea, not the car blinker, but the horse blinkers. So basically, to kind of isolate your where the views and to kind of frame the view at different parts of the house. So when you first enter, like for example, okay, the first story is basically where all the public areas are. So you have the services, your kind of your helper's room, your services M&E space. Well, on this side is kind of like the guest room and the gym. And when you first enter, basically the idea was that we frame this view and then we use these solid programs to kind of block the unwanted views while you kind of focus onto a curated landscape. And then on this spiral staircase that leads up to the second floor. So in this particular case, what we did was we decided to kind of elevate programs which are typically on the ground floor, like your swimming pool, your outdoor terrace, your living room. So we decided to kind of elevate all of these programs to the second floor because in so doing, you get to kind of capitalize on the view at the rear, which is behind here. So and at the same time, for what we did was like programs like your kitchen and your movie room, which are kind of very inward looking spaces. We use them to kind of block the view of the neighbors, and also at the same time we also kind of allow for ventilation by having these corridors through because there also is north south, so allow for the north south monsoon to kind of go through and ventilate this kind of open surrounding space. And then we decided to kind of put all the bedrooms on the third floor because it's a multi-generation home. So we decided that all the family members get a equitable view. So by arranging all the rooms kind of around the perimeter of the floor plate, that allows each room to have equitable view of the outside and ventilation and light. And so you end up with having a internal corridor which is mechanically ventilated and also lit up by skylight. And we also kind of have a small family area here which you can close off. So you kind of section across to kind of show you the idea of the house. So with the view at the back and then the spiral staircase up. Yeah. So for the, like I mentioned, like even for the when we do require openings, like I say this is actually the wet kitchen looking out. When we do require windows, so we also kind of introduce this extended kind of vertical thing to kind of sort of limit the view and privacy. And then on the third floor, we designed this aluminum screen which allows you to kind of open up like blinkers, allows you to kind of regulate your view. And then when you can close it for privacy. So this is the view of the second floor. So we took advantage of an open plan and then to kind of appreciate this view at the rear. And then with the scaffold ceiling here, we kind of incorporated it with lighting and air conditioning system. And also to kind of create this feeling of a cave, that kind of a caven feel. So even sitting in this place, you kind of feel that you are in a cave looking outside to the view. So this was like during the so one interesting thing about this coffered ceiling was how do we actually fabricate it, because it was actually a lot of it, and then to get the contractor to kind of manually put this together is gonna be very onerous. So what we did was that because if you notice, we have shown you the plan. So the sizes of this coffered ceiling kind of varies because you got different grid line, and we needed to kind of also accommodate and hide the beams. So the sizes of the coffers are actually varied. So in order to kind of reduce the onerousness of putting this together, we actually fabricated the corner unit. And then for the varying length, we kind of patch it up with like plasterboard. So that kind of cut down the cost and to fabricate this thing. Some of the details there. So we basically incorporated lighting, and also the air conditioning system within this whole thing, so that when you look up the ceiling, you don't see aircon, and then also the lighting. So this is the view of the back. So basically, after the client kind of move in, and they basically just stay on this floor. So nobody goes on the first floor because this almost feel like the new ground level. So we even provided a kind of a direct staircase that leads up to the garden at the rear. This is actually the view of the ground floor of the. That's how I mentioned when you first enter, and then this was the services space to kind of framing up this thing. And then we kind of enjoy doing, like small detailings, like funny handrails that kind of mimic the coffer ceiling. And then this is actually quite interesting because the internal corridor, because we wanted to give all the bedrooms ventilation and light along, we kind of arranged them at the perimeter. So you end up with a internal corridor. So to kind of solve that, we had to kind of introduce a mechanical ventilation, but we didn't want to see like the mechanical grill. So we kind of this was actually a detailed drawing of that little thing that we was trying out, and then this is Patrick trying, so proud of his like creation. So it's back to the skylight. So we kind of introduce a skylight, but at the same time also the mechanical ventilation, the way that we hide it was that we introduce a sleeve, and then the grills are kind of concealed inside. So this was to kind of solve that situation. Yeah, and this was okay because on site we had this kind of funny beige boundary wall that we inherited, so we were to keep this. So we wanted to kind of, because it was initially we were like, how are we ever gonna make this work with the house, because it looks quite odd, but then we kind of got this idea that perhaps then we should have that different scale of things, by the different scale of this onto the second floor that kind of wraps around on the second floor. So we cut up tiles, and then because we were on a budget, we just couldn't afford like travertine stone, so we did this. Yeah, this is actually the view of the third floor, where you see how the screens actually is. It's a family room, and this is actually the view of one of the rooms on the third floor. So this is how the house looks like, and that's pretty much the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Iskandar. So once again, a round of applause to Iskandar. You can drink a bit of Follain, and then we can drink a lot after that. So thank you so much for sharing all of this amazing project. I've been taking a lot of notes, and there is something that comes back again and again in your architecture. This high level of composition, and you use the word multiple times, like carving out continuity, carving out even like the seashell that you've been doing in one of the house, carving out shapes and mounts. Is it something that is fundamental in your architecture, this like very sculptural approach to the buildings?
Actually, not so much on whether. Okay, how we kind of started out usually, because like we imagine the spaces actually as a series of scenes. Like we kind of imagine how one would actually go through the space, like and how one would kind of create a film where you kind of imagine scene one, this happens, and as one walks through. So we kind of work with that, and then to kind of see how various scenes string up, and from there we see how that will work with how the following the next view and things like that. It's more like because it kind of section is very important to us. In the sense that it is good to kind of test out how the because we start off with plan and then you can test it out the section and then you go back to the plan and then you test it out 3D in the end. So it's kind of not exactly always 3D and always carving out and things like that. But what we actually always kind of attempt to do in some of the houses that we do is that we always wanted to kind of create. We always want to kind of create how this new spatial test out new spatial typology, like for example, because I do a lot of residential houses, so we wanted to have this idea on like spaces, kind of overlooking spaces to get depth, to create kind of depth in layerings through rather than a room with 4 walls that has 0 depth, right? So next level is a room that kind of overlooks to another space. So what if you have a room which kind of overlook multiple space, and then to kind of in that sense it is a bit 3D, but could say that.
Yes, that's what we could see in many of your projects where we see the courtyard, like the central courtyard, the central element, how people move around, what do you get to see, and again like the framing, the space, the vistas, and that at first I thought it was a very graphical approach. Something is very graphic, super composed, but you use some words such as a family interaction, human relationship, humanistic set of architecture, where these spaces, while they may appear as strongly graphics, actually they are very much places for people to interact. Is it something that is very essential in what you do?
Yeah, that's what we attempted to do. In fact, when we were in window house, when we were trying to kind of photograph the space, we realized that it was very difficult because while we kind of experienced, the experience was different when you actually walked through that, but we were trying to convey that experience through photograph, and we found it very difficult because so I mean it's always something that we always try to do. Make the space relate more to the users and to their needs. And in this case, because we do a lot of houses, so the users are kind of for family interaction and things like that.
Thanks for responding to my questions. Maybe you can switch off this blue screen because it's not really nice. So how can we switch off the blue screen at the back? Is it Cosentino people? Okay, never mind. So they can switch off that blue screen because it's pretty distracting. There is something that you did not show in all of your slides. How do you start a project? What is that? Is there like a first stroke or something? How do you start your project?
It's confusion. So basically, starting the first project is always like the most difficult. I don't know. I mean, usually I will kind of first of all, the initial sketch is sometimes when you try hard to kind of come up with something, most of the time the harder you try, nothing will come out. So I mean, the first step is of course just to. So after a while I kind of tell myself that it is okay not to come on because you don't have an expectation for the first few weeks, and then you kind of basically explore basically from the client's brief and kind of explore things related to that and spaces or kind of interesting spaces that perhaps you think that would be relevant in that context, and then you kind of explore, and then but usually most of the time I realize that the breakthrough usually comes when you're not actually actively thinking about it. It's like because the first few steps is like the fact that the divergence of design where you kind of explore aimlessly, not really knowing where you're going. But actually, I feel that innately your brain is actually working even though you're not kind of actively thinking about it. So most of the time, I find that sometimes the ideas or the breakthroughs come when when you are not really thinking about it. So it's kind of, but okay, that doesn't really kind of help to kind of explain. But I mean, but usually we kind of okay, let's say we have some ideas, we usually test it out on plan to see whether it kind of, and then we test it out like in section, and then we do a model to kind of test out the idea, see whether it kind of works. Yeah. And what we also do usually is that we it's something which I learned from my former workplace, which is actually to do physical models. So that kind of helped not only for you to kind of test out certain areas, certain spaces that you imagine, but it also kind of use a useful tool as convincing the client about the quality of the space. Yeah.
Thanks for bringing this, because that leads me to the other question that I was having is, what made you deciding to take that leap of faith and to start your own firm, coming from Formworks, that is a pretty famous company, and they're doing fantastic design. That he was Alan was one of our speakers at the previous tab series, the number 2. So like, what triggered that moment where you were like, okay, that's now, I do it now?
Right. I think because for me, it's like, I mean, from the beginning, right, that whole relationship with the practice and the architecture is very personal to me. And then it's something that I wanted to kind of take that journey with the practice, something under my own terms and the way that I want to kind of explore certain things, which give me, I mean, by practicing it on your own, you kind of have a bit more luxury in terms of where you want to kind of explore and go. So I just wanted to have that kind of, I wanted to kind of have that relationship under my own terms. So in that sense, yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot. Do you have any questions to Iskandar? Because I do have a few more questions. So do you have any questions? Great, no questions. So I do have questions that is related to this one. Since you opened your own firm, did you face major challenges? Some moment where you were like, why did I do that? Why did I open my own firm? So some moment where, as an entrepreneur, that you might have felt at loss, you know?
Surely, I mean, I started my whole career in architecture completely lost first, right? Yeah, so it's I think having doubts is, and some doubt once in a while is actually kind of a healthy, so that you don't get into this state of stagnant state. So yeah, especially it was I think especially hard, especially when you first started out, and with I was a one-man show when I first started out. You know, it's like, you know, when you had those moments of doubt, that was the most hard, because you were alone and you don't have someone to kind of throw back and kind of express your ideas or your concerns. So I very much appreciate now that we have thankfully kind of expanded a little bit. So we have team members, and that kind of really helped in that for during that moments of doubt. You know, I mean, doubt can come in various ways. You know, like from making wrong design decisions along the way. You know, like sometimes we as architects we make a lot of decisions every day. You know, like, and we cannot be spending too much time dwelling on one thing, and then, you know, so sometimes we do make fast decision, and then sometimes and then you regret after seeing that thing, you know, like you choose this wrong style and it looks horrible after you see a whole big space. Yeah. And but what I find, I think also it's doubt is also good, because sometimes when you think you're so cocksure of yourself, you know, like you're so sure, and then but actually multiple times I was proven wrong myself. So second guessing happens, and then you kind of always throw it out and then have a discussion with the teammates.
Thanks a lot. And I will ask a very last question that is basically replacing your practice into a regional context. What do you think of the challenges that young architects are facing, not only in Singapore, but Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, so in our ASEAN region, the challenges that you have faced or that you might face, are they similar in our region, and do we feel connected in our region?
I mean, the one thing that the thing is practicing in Singapore, what I find is that, you know, when we talk about critical regionalism, talking about, you know, building something in a local context, where in the context of Singapore, unfortunately, because we unfortunately lack that rich heritage, our historical heritage. We the whole idea of we were kind of started from scratch, like tabula rasa. I mean, for Singapore's context. So sometimes I envy like architects in the region where like in Indonesia you've got like multitudes of culture and history that you can always go back to and kind of take as a rich resource, a form of resource. So it's like, for example, if sometimes I see the rich weaving, rattan weave example. We recently was doing a project and I had this dilemma, like this rattan weaving thing. I mean, it is very much Indonesian, but to say that it is Singaporean is not quite right. So I mean, for me, I find that that dilemma as well. I mean, we were doing this interior for Satay Club Harry's Bar. So the idea was the satay. So satay, and then we kind of got inspired by the satay fan, and also so naturally we kind of look into rattan. So I was kind of, so how do I use this rattan product, but in a kind of a new way that is relatable to the local context and not seem like this could have been a project in Indonesia or something like that. So and I find that context in Singapore especially because how do we as architects in Singapore practice architecture? How do we kind of have that what's the, because we don't have the rich history or the kind of tap on rich resource in terms of cultural resource and things, and our history is very recent. So what then do we offer, and how do we kind of, how do you make something different? So that is something which I don't really have a solution at this point in time. But my point of view is that what we have to offer is that, because sometimes while we don't have that rich historical history that we can tap on a resource, but like for example, if you see the works of, let's say, Woha and how they are kind of engaging into, it's it's kind of interesting how Singapore kind of, like, for example, when you started this NParks regulation about planting trees, and then even though it started out as a top-down kind of policy approach, and then but it has begun to, over the short history of Singapore, and it has begun to be a very iconic and a kind of imageability of Singapore itself. I mean, you like it or you hate it. I mean, like Jewel is amazing. I mean, like it is also an image which is aligned to that. So and while we don't have that heritage to kind of fall back to kind of draw references from, but I think where Singapore architects can come in is that way that, like for example, when you explore relationship between nature and humans, like why don't we kind of explore that relationship in a new way? I mean, we talk about rewilding, or talking about retaining of nature what is lost, instead of viewing that, instead of going back to the past on how nature can grow and trying to bring it back, rather than how do we explore a new relationship ecologically using new technologies to kind of find that. I think that's where, I would say, like, to kind of have that approach, or kind of as Singapore architects to kind of,
And that we can see in your architecture as well, in the way that you are integrating nature at different levels of the buildings, and that we have seen in all of your very generous spaces. So on that note, I would like to end the talk of today. Before we give you a last round of applause, I will say to come back again for the next session the next month. That will be in conjunction with the World Architecture Festival. So it's just a few days before, so we are part of the festival this year. So thanks again for Cosentino, and above all, thank you so much, Iskandar, for sharing all of your creation.